You're watching Newswire. I'm Jared Jakang Mayer. The Minnesota state government shut down on July 1st after Governor Mark Dayton and the Republican-controlled legislature failed to reach a consensus on a budget. Minnesota must close a $5 billion budget shortfall. Governor Dayton, a Democrat, remains committed to increasing taxes on the rich, while conservatives in the House and Senate demand funding cuts. Here to tell us about this stalemate, we have Andy Birkey. He's a reporter with the Minnesota Independent. Thanks for joining us, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
So this shutdown is several days in. What does it look like on the ground there in Minnesota, and what types of services are even available?
Well, really the only things that are open now are the courts and public safety. Some skeleton government is in play, just kind of keeping, essential services going. But things like healthcare, state parks, that kind of stuff, closed.
And so all of those workers are just, sitting on a shelf, or they're just told to stand by and they're not available to do any of their jobs?
Actually, about 22,000 have been laid off, and many are applying for unemployment benefits.
And how did Minnesota get to this place?
Well, we elected a DFL governor whose campaign platform was to raise taxes on the wealthiest 2% of Minnesotans. And we also elected, for the first time in many, many years, a Republican-controlled legislature, which is committed to no tax increases at all. And neither side is willing to budge. And
what were some of the issues that each side brought up that they just could not reach an agreement on?
Well, Dayton is pretty insistent that new revenues need to be raised to fill that $5 billion budget deficit. And the Republicans have said, we're not going to raise a single cent on anyone and keep funding flat from the last 2 years.
So the government shut down, and now it does seem that there are some negotiations between the two sides, right?
Well, they're meeting every day. Today they met for about half an hour. Nothing happened. In fact, the governor came out and said they took a step backwards. So it could go on for a while. So
this could be a long slog that the government is shut down there in Minnesota.
Yeah, people are predicting several weeks, maybe even a month.
Now, you had written an article today on the MinnesotaIndependent.com that looked at some of the negotiations, and that the Republicans were throwing in some pretty interesting things into their list of demands.
Yeah, a day before the deadline for the shutdown, they introduced some negotiation tactics that included a ban on abortion, a ban on stem cell research, privatizing some school-based vouchers, and photo ID for voting were some of the issues that came up, stuff that Dayton had already vetoed in the past. And issues that are pretty divisive here in Minnesota.
And of course, those aren't just fiscal issues. If we're talking about a budget, these are actual social issues. How did Democrats and other observers respond to this type of tactic by the Republicans?
Well, there was a pretty swift PR on the part of the Democrats in Minnesota. Obviously, things like voter ID would actually increase the amount of spending. It's an expensive thing to implement, something Minnesota doesn't have currently. But also, the entire legislative session has kind of been dominated by social issues, like anti-gay marriage amendment. There are 3 different abortion bans that were brought up. So these are issues that the Republicans have been hit with before.
And so it seems like there's a lot of this gamesmanship and negotiations going on where neither side wants to give up what they have. What does the average citizen there in Minnesota think about both parties here? Does one side look better than the other?
Well, Dayton's got the bully pulpit as the governor, so he can spread his message pretty far. But, this shutdown happened on a 4th of July weekend. Minnesota is a very outdoor state. A lot of people had to cancel their plans to go to the state parks. Rest stops were closed, so legislators took a lot of heat at 4th of July parades, got a lot of terse words thrown at them.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what comes of these negotiations, and we're going to have to leave it there. So, Andy Birkey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Andy Birkey, he's a reporter with the Minnesota Independent. To follow up on some of the stories that they're doing there in Minnesota, go to the MinnesotaIndependent.com.